Hello everyone, this is Nick with Hylio. Today's video is the second video going over the operations manual. The first one covered the introductions and hardware. So we're going to pick up at spray drone basics and get through the remote controller as well. We're going to try to get this one a little shorter than the last one, but we will see how that goes. So jumping down in here to do spray drone basics. First section here is about flight modes, manual, and autopilot. So just kind of what is manual, what is autopilot, what does that mean? If you've never used a drone before, these words will be familiar to you, but maybe you don't really understand what that means in the context of a drone. So for a drone, spray drone, you can generally be operating it in a manual flight mode or autopilot flight mode or somewhere in between. We briefly touched on this during the introduction when we were looking at definitions, looking at the definitions of all the various flight modes. What those flight modes are essentially the mindset of the drone, how the flight controller goes about doing what it's going to do, all the way from just the autopilot flight mode where the drone is just going to follow the predetermined mission that you put onto it from the computer, versus all the way on the other side, a fully manual flight mode where it's following the sticks from the controller. And then there's, all across in between, such as RTL, where this is an auto mode where the drone's going to climb up, come back home to the land location, and go down and land. Or land, which is another flight mode, an auto one, where the drone will automatically just land in place. Something like land, for example, has a little bit of manual in it. If you're in land mode, you can move the controller around, move that stick, and the drone will actually change its land location as it's coming down. It's just important to know what these different flight modes are, and using that definitions page can help with that a lot. And it's just really important to know how you can access the various flight modes using the controller versus using the computer, kind of what's available to you, and based on your operation, what you're doing, what you want to have ready and what you want to focus on. Do you want to have that controller ready all the time, or you can default to going to that computer? So that's flight modes. Moving on here, just taking a brief look at this stuff because we'll get into more detail about all of this later on. Checklists, settings, and calibrations. So drones in general, we try to keep them similar to manned aviation with the philosophical approach to operating them. So you're going to want to rely really heavily on these checklists and paying attention to your settings and doing all your calibrations. This stuff is super important to consistent operation over time. When you've got something like this that can be really dangerous if you don't use it correctly, you want to really make sure to rely on those checklists to make sure, for example, I'm going to click takeoff 100 times in a day. Well, it's easy to make a mistake, 1 in 100 times, which is why you lean on these checklists. Like anyone who gets into an airplane as a pilot would know, you follow these checklists religiously to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. Settings, these drones, particularly since they're so autonomous, I say this a lot during training, the drone is autonomous, not intelligent. It's going to do what you tell it to do autonomously, but at the end of the day, it's doing what you told it to do. So big part of that is all of these settings, and there's a lot of them. So it's important to at least know which settings are the most important for safety, and using those, wherever you can. And maybe you're not going to check all 50 settings or whatever it is every time you go fly, but you're going to want to know which ones are the most important to make sure that drone doesn't fly into anything. And lastly, calibrations. So like any piece of kind of complicated equipment, there's going to be calibrations. You got a lot of compasses on there, a lot of other sensors, flow meters, stuff like that. All these things are going to routinely need calibration. We'll have a whole section on this later on, but it's just something you got to understand about these, autonomous equipment, that is just going to be a part of it. All right, so moving on, we've got our auto mission flight patterns. So this is going to introduce some more of those terms that we're going to, talk about throughout this manual. Again, look up to the definitions if you want a little more information on each of them. This is a little walkthrough here of what the auto missions look like in general on one of our drones. So just from 1 through 8 here, the drone, whenever you go to take it off, say you've put an auto mission on it, and that's this green part there, the spray area. That could be a number of different things. That could be the perimeter of a field. That could be a spot treatment, whatever. We're just kind of representing it as this one lawnmower pattern. So you're going to arm the motors on the drone. You're going to take off, and the first thing the drone's going to do is going to climb straight up to the ferry altitude. So there's 3 different altitudes and 3 different speeds that the drone will follow in any given mission. First one, ferry altitude and ferry speed. So this is when you're going out to the field. So you take off, you climb up, ferry altitude, and then you move at the ferry speed out to the field location. So above this field location, you can already see the selection of this ferry altitude is very important for safety when you're talking about fences, tree lines, stuff like that, to make sure that you're getting over stuff. So we get out there at the ferry speed. Now we're going to drop down to the spray altitude. So again, big safety one here, making sure we're high enough over the crop to stay safe. Now it's going to go do its business at the spray speed, and then when it's done, it's going to RTL. So that's another one of those terms you're going to want to look up. Return to launch, return to land, kind of used interchangeably. It's going to climb to the RTL altitude, and you guessed it, go at the RTL speed back to the land location and come back down. Now, this ferry and RTL altitude and speed doesn't have to be the same. There's a few kind of various reasons you might want to make them different. For most new pilots, I would recommend just leaving this stuff the same. In general, if one of these is going to be safe, they're probably both going to be safe. And if one of them isn't going to be safe, then you might want to consider your thinking of if the other one is safe. So yeah, that's the general flight pattern for an auto mission. There's 4 different mission types. So when you're in this little green portion here, you can spray a polygon mission, which is just like a rectangular kind of pattern on a field. You can do a perimeter, which is just going to do passes around the border of this field. You can do a spline, which is just any arbitrary line in that field area. So maybe you're following a waterway or something like that you'd like to clear out. You'd use a spline for that. Or lastly, we've got spot missions where the drone is going to go hit individual spots kind of one at a time. Now, this mission flight pattern is going to be the same no matter what this mission type is. So it's still going to hit that ferry altitude, ferry speed, go down to the mission, do the mission, whatever it is, back up to RTL, and back to land. Now, again, similar to those altitudes, this land location does not have to be where you took off. Now, for most people, most of the time, it's going to be. And that's probably going to be more safe because you already know it's a safe spot, just land where you took off. You don't need to set this. If you just take off, it's going to automatically land where it took off. There is a little land point on the screen. If you want to drag that somewhere else, it'll go and land in that new location. Get into more details on that on the software guide, but so you're aware, it is possible. Moving on, we've got our spray mission workflow. So this doesn't really need to be strictly followed. It's just kind of a general guide for people to help understand the process, what it's going to look like for you to try to not forget things. Hylio, when we were operating a spray service for many years, we don't do that so much anymore, generally had these different tasks, these different steps here done by different employees who are kind of trained for that one thing. So these can be looked at very separately. Just depending on your operation, you're probably doing all of these, but it's good to understand that these can be broken down and treated independently. So, first step in general is surveying the area that you're going to go spray. So, depending on what you want to do, this could involve going out and taking a camera drone and taking a video, a bunch of pictures of the area and make a little map to look at. Could involve using that handheld GPS tracker and marking off, walking around the edge of the field, marking off the edge, or it could involve just looking, walking around. Maybe you're still going to draw off Google Maps just straight into the software, but you're going to go out hopefully and look and see if maybe there's a new grain bin in the middle of that field that wasn't there before. This step can be done in the winter. A lot of the time we have a lot of people do this when there's no crop on. It's more easy to get out and survey, and your spray season is going to be crunch time for a lot of people, a lot of applications. You don't have a lot of time. So as much as you can do a lot of this preparation before it's that critical spray season. Get everything marked off, get all your emissions made, be ready to go. So survey step, super important as far as finding out obstacles and just getting to know your field a little bit. Second step is that pre-mission preparation of actually drawing those fields. So maybe you've gone out now and you've checked out your field. Now you want to draw it in the software. So this is figuring out your chemical ratios, your speeds, just getting everything ready to go. If your missions are all set up, that's going to save you a ton of time in the morning when you get out to the location. If you're just going out and you're hitting that upload button and you're going to go take off, that's way faster than sitting down. Now I got to survey. Now I want to draw the mission. You're going to be much more prone to making mistakes. And, mistakes a lot of time can lead to accidents. So you want to try to separate these as much as you can. When you do show up to the field, this is kind of roped in here as well, making sure everything's charged, laptop, remote controller, batteries. Nothing worse than going out there and you want to be using the remote controller and it's dead. That thing uses a lot of juice, so you're going to want to keep it charged pretty much every day. So then, you're at your spray area. Now we're going to start doing our spray emissions. There's a lot of compliance that can go along with this if you're doing all that. Hopefully watch that U.S. regulations video and you will know how to comply. There's notice that sometimes will have to be given to neighbors, stuff like that. You want to make sure people around are going to know. Don't tell the whole town or anything because they'll come watch, but you don't want to be surprising people that you're spraying nearby. So at this time, we're following checklists, we're following our safety guidelines, and whenever you're done, you're going to want to notify who you need to notify, clean things out, and get out of there. And lastly, we're looking at daily maintenance. So keeping the drone clean is really the number one thing here, and just storing that equipment safely. Depending on the temperature and just you got a bunch of batteries or something, maybe keep them in a shed. So that's the general workflow for doing spray emissions. Of course, this can vary very much so, but depending on the operation. But this can maybe give you a good idea, maybe what to look out for, maybe some things you might not have otherwise done. All right, our next section here, manual flight, how to use the RC. So I have an RC here we're going to be looking at. It's probably going to be hard to see on the video, so maybe grab yours while you're watching it or just zoom in here on the picture on your screen. A couple things to know about this. It can be a little bit confusing to use, number one. Number two, this RC does not have Hylio's autonomous mission planning software on there. So we already talked about this a little bit during that hardware section, but in case you skipped that, very important to know, this does not receive or send telemetry data to the drone. By telemetry data, I mean battery voltage, altitude, anything like that. It can't send missions, it can't do anything. There is software on this controller that in theory, if that telemetry data was connected, could go and generate other types of autonomous missions that will probably go and crash your drone. So we do not turn it on because we have a lot of safety features and stuff like that in our software that is not in the software on here. So it's not plugged in. So what this controller is for is video streaming of that first person video and using the sticks and turning on and off the sprayer and changing flight modes. So again, there's no missions, there's no monitoring altitude, battery, anything like that. That's on the computer. This is just for flying the drone around, changing the flight modes, and watching the video. So there are, I guess, 6 different buttons on this thing that you need to be aware of. A, which is the manual control, it's the loiter flight mode. Again, we're talking about flight modes again. If you want to go and read more about each flight mode, jump back up to the start in that definitions page. So we've got loiter flight mode, RTL flight mode, land flight mode, and brake. So important thing to know, these settings that command these buttons change a little bit depending on the year that your controller came out, because we've been slowly making it a little easier to use. So what I'm going to talk about right now, the way I'm going to explain this is probably the highest quantity of drones that we have out there. So we're talking about probably 2021 to, I don't know, maybe April of 2023. So the majority of drones that we're looking at. This also, for the most part, applies to drones after April 2023. There's just been a few things that make them a little easier to use. But anyway, you've got these 4 buttons, and you've also got this button at the top here, the trigger finger button. Now, this turns on and off the sprayer. Charging this thing, there is a, if you pull off this little rubber thing at the bottom, there is a charging port, which is a micro USB. This controller does not last super long. It's doing a lot of work with all that video transmission and the big old screen on it. So, I mean, you imagine running an iPad streaming a movie for 7-8 hours straight. It's just not always going to work out. So you're gonna want to be set up to charge this thing throughout the day if you're having it all day long, and for sure you want it fully charged to start every spray day. A couple of things about how this works, just like safety stuff. Important thing to know is when you turn this thing on, it will take over the drone. So the drone essentially, and again, this gets back into those flight modes, and this can be a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try to explain it. In reality, you're probably just going to need to practice this stuff to understand it yourself, because it's kind of complicated. The drone at all times is looking for the latest flight mode change. Because we have these 2 separate versions of control of the drone, you got the controller and the computer, neither one of them has precedence over the other. Whichever the drone sees a command from last is what it's going to do. And that command is going to come in the form of these flight mode changes. So let's say I've got this controller turned off. I go and I start flying around with the computer, I'm doing it on a mission. If I turn this controller on, the drone will see a flight mode from this controller, because the controller, as soon as it turns on, it defaults into brake mode. The drone's going to see that and it's going to brake. So you need to understand, if this was turned off and you turn it on while the drone's in an auto mission, it will take over. Now, we put it in a brake mode on purpose because that way, if you're messing around with the sticks, it's not going to do anything. It'll just stop. If you did that on accident, you need to take over with the computer again, you can do that. We'll get to that in the software guide, how to do that exactly. Now, if you, let's say, other side, I had this turned on and then I started the auto mission, it's not taking over because it was turned on. As soon as this turned on, it had command of the drone. But then when I went in the computer and I told the drone to take off, the computer took over. It put it in auto mode. So you see how it's listening to the last command that it was given. So it's flying around in auto mode. You're moving the sticks around, nothing's happening. Now, if I go out of range of this, the drone will return home. It'll enter RTL if you're using this RC Loss Link RTL. All right, so I understand this can get kind of confusing, like I said, so you're going to want to practice with this. Practice with the controller doing what you would want to be able to do in a high stress scenario. Because, the reality of it is, if there is, you make a mistake or something like that, and you need to use the controller, you need to take some emergency action. If you haven't practiced, you are not going to be able to do it in a high stress scenario. And believe me, it is high stress. If that drone is headed the wrong way from what you thought you told it to do because you made some mistake, your heart's beating pretty quick. So you want to know what your options are. If your controller is going to be right next to you, turned on all the time, you need to know what buttons you need to press to take over. Now, a couple other safety things. There are settings in the menu on this thing, on the software. Don't go in there and change anything. Don't update this. Don't mess around. It has its own software. So like I said, if you do that, you can do things like calibrate these sticks wrong or make other changes like that that can cause you problems. Just don't go into the software on there and mess around with anything. Number one. Number two, if you have a drone that has a GoPro in it, which a lot of them do, don't put a battery in the GoPro. Just something important to know. The power system is not meant to be charging GoPro batteries. It's just meant to keep the GoPro on. All right, continuing on here. So manual controls. I want to fly manually with this drone. If any of you have flown DJI before, or probably most of those Chinese drones, there's kind of two steps to flying a drone around. First is you need to arm the motors, and next you need to take off. So on a DJI, to arm the motors, you take both these sticks and you push them down into the center like this. On Hylio's drones, you only do it with the left stick. Left stick down into the center is going to idle up the motors. You're going to arm those motors, start spinning, and then to take off, you take that left stick, push it up off the ground. Drone will climb up off the ground. So that left stick, that's for altitude, up and down, and it's for rotation, left and right. So yaw, turn it around. The right stick is for movement in the horizontal plane. So left, right, forward, and back, right here. And then, like I said before, that last one turns the pump on and off. I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to cut in really quick here with a video of me actually flying the drone, in real life, kind of how I described in the video just a second ago, so you can kind of understand a little bit better in person what I'm talking about there. So first thing, we've got the controller turned on, drone is turned on. I actually have the software on the computer pulled up just on the table over here, so I can make sure to check what flight mode I'm in. A lot of people who the first time flying might have trouble getting things started because maybe they're in the wrong flight mode, or the drone does take a minute to boot up, so you might try to arm it and it just doesn't take off right away. You have no idea what's going on because it doesn't tell you anything on the controller. And you can sort of see in the video here, it says waiting for vehicle connection in this part. Doesn't mean anything. We're connected. You can see the video feed, so we're good to go. So to get started here, I'm just going to hold that left stick to the bottom right corner, just how we talked about. And I held it for a couple of seconds. I'm going to pause it here. So in person, you're actually going to hear it make a beeping sound. The motors, as soon as the drone is powered on, the motors are constantly beeping, beep, 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 until it's about to start spinning. Then it makes one long beep, and then they start idling up. So I held it down into that corner until I heard that long beep, and then we saw the motors start idling up there, so I let go. And then I pushed that stick up. Now again, let's just see that one more time. I held it into the bottom right corner. I let go when I heard that sound, and then now we're pushing up, and I just got to push to get it off the ground. It's going to jump right off the ground. Now, I flew this kind of close to myself here, closer than I'm generally going to be comfortable with, just so you could see in the video. Normally, you're going to want that farther away, and you can hold up, you don't need to be shy about taking off the ground. You can hold that stick up for a little while, really get that thing into the air. Now, I just tried to keep it in frame just so we can, see what's going on. I didn't want to fly it above the camera. Next here, see I pushed to the left and I pushed to the right on this right stick, so that moved the drone left and right. Now we're flying back, we're flying towards us again, and we're back. All that's on the right stick. So just like I said, that's that kind of lateral motion. Now we jump back on this left stick again. We're pushing to the left and to the right. See how the drone turns left and right like that? That's called yaw. And now, see, we're going to push it down again. See, I push it down, I let go, it stays in place. I push up, I let go, it's going to stay in place where it is. Kind of bring it back down again to be in frame. And last thing I'm doing, just to, I kind of just showed you the basic controls here. I'm pressing that C button, that's that land button, and the drone is coming down to land. So pretty simple, not a whole lot to it. Just you are probably going to want to have the computer up so you can see if it's throwing you any errors, because you won't see from the controller. This is one of our production controllers. It doesn't have the labels on the stickers yet. Your drone will have labels, on these little buttons, so you can, see what they all do. Pretty simple. I would recommend practicing, and once again, do this farther away from yourself, especially your first time, and make sure you know which direction the front of the drone is. All right, we'll go back to our regular video. Now, a couple of tips about flying manual. In the software, you can choose your maximum flight speed, manual flight speed. I would recommend keeping that at 2 to 4 miles an hour. I'm pretty sure when we shipped the drones out, we set it to like 3. It's really slow. You can speed it up to 20 if you want, but I would start real slow until you get used to the controls, because these drones are big and they're heavy. So don't expect it to fly the same as a tiny little 2-pound drone will. This thing is going to fly like a yacht because they are huge. Another important thing to know, whenever you're taking off manually, it's kind of easy to forget which side of the drone is the front because they're pretty symmetrical. So make sure that you know which side the front is. So if you take off and you think, oh, I want to fly forward, and you think the front is that way, but in reality the front is this way, and you push this stick full speed forward and that starts heading towards you, you'd be in for a little bit of fright. So make sure you know which side the front is. You can use the motor lights. The white is on the back side of the drone, under the motors. There's usually stickers on it too that you can see which one is the front. Don't fly them inside buildings where you won't have GPS, because our manual flying relies on using GPS. We have a GPS denied mode. I really would not recommend using it. Just maybe 2 or 3 of our customers have done that. Wouldn't recommend it. Don't fly it inside buildings. Just try to understand what flight mode that you're in at all times, just so you know what to do. You're going to want to keep this controller nearby. And another thing, very important difference between Hylio's drones and DJI drones, and probably most other drone models. When you go to land a drone on a DJI, you just hold this stick all the way down, and it just, once it gets kind of close, it slows down and it lands. Hylio drones do not do that. If you hold the stick all the way down, the drone's just going to go full speed into the ground. You need to either hold it down and then kind of go slowly into the ground, or my preference would be just press the land button. Just press the land button. The computer can land better than you can. It can fly the drone better than you can. So that would be my recommendation there. Just press land. So FPV. FPV shows up on the computer here, or on the monitor. There's a little guide here on how to show it on this controller once we get to page 25 there. So we'll get to that in a minute. But a couple things to know about FPV. There will be a message on the controller here. So we'll see if we can zoom in and see it. As soon as you turn on the controller, it says this waiting for vehicle connection. Like I said before, it's not plugged in to send that telemetry data. So you get speed is 0, altitude 0. That's what that's talking about. You can ignore this. Waiting for vehicle connection does not mean that it's not working. So just ignore that message. Now, zooming back up here. So you can ignore that message. GoPro camera. So a lot of our drones have these GoPro cameras on them. If you have a GoPro, you have to power it on every time the drone is turned on. Now, We understand this is kind of annoying. We have some other solutions coming, but in reality, a lot of people just don't use the video feed. But you want to use it, you have to go walk up and press the on button on the GoPro, and then it should connect. If it's not connecting, there could be some various things going on wrong. It should connect right away, especially the newer ones. Moving on, so a little more information about these flight mode buttons. So this is kind of getting back to where things can get kind of confusing with this controller. So, we talked a bit about the interaction just between the controller and the computer and these flight modes and how this really matters a lot to the drone. Now I want to talk a bit about these, in particular, ABCD buttons. I want you to think about these ABCD buttons not as buttons to command, I'm just telling the drone to land. I want you to think about it as a 4-position switch. Just like how we have here, how this switch can be in 1, 2, 3, or 4. You're not pressing the 4 on this little dial, you're turning it to 4. This is really important because this is how these 4 buttons on the controller actually work. If I press that RTL button, it switches this switch to 2 basically into RTL. Let's say I press that RTL button. We switch over, drone goes into RTL. Now I go on the computer and I press that pause button to stop it, and now I go back to the controller. So the computer took over, it's doing something else now. I go back to the controller. If I press that RTL button again, nothing's going to happen because the switch, that ABCD switch, is already in position 2 at RTL. So you need to know basically which position this switch is in, and this can happen a lot when people are flying around manually. And most commonly where I see this is where they're flying around and they press land. And okay, I land the drone, now I want to go take off again. So when I want to go take off again, I just go to arm the drone, right? I just move the stick down here to idle up the motors. But that switch, that ABCD, is still sitting on land. So this drone, this controller, is still in land mode. If I want to take off again, I have to go switch myself over to manual. I got to move that switch over. It's not just a command to tell it to go over there. You need to move that switch. So, like I was saying before, this is one of those things that is hard to understand unless you practice it a little bit. So I would recommend take the controller, and you can see that flight mode in the computer. So on that GCS software, you can see the flight mode on the operations tab. So I recommend that you mess around with these buttons and feel how long you have to press them, how long you have to hold them, stuff like that, to, and start pressing like pause or something like that on the computer, and just get a feeling for how this is going to work. Now, the thing that I mentioned before about new drones behaving a little bit differently than old drones, fortunately, this behavior is not quite as prevalent on drones after, April of 2023. We managed to get to where the manual and brake buttons, anytime you press them, even if you press it like twice in a row, it's still going to work. You don't really need to worry about that too much because most people are just going to press it twice in a row anyway. But moral of the story here is practice with this. Practice anything you think you may need to do, and just make sure that in that high stress scenario, you know what you have to do to take over or do whatever emergency response that you want to do to a given scenario. So moving on, manual flight. We already talked about this a little bit. A couple more tips. You want to be in loiter, first of all, to fly manually. To arm the drone, we're going to take this stick here, throttle stick in the bottom right corner for 3 seconds, and then we let go. If you don't take off in 6 seconds, they're going to disarm again. So once they're armed, you see them spinning, you want to move this throttle stick up to about 75%, and you can go all the way up, but just move it up. While you hold it up, it's going to keep climbing and climbing until you let go, and it goes back to the middle, then it's going to stop, and now you're in the air. Now you've got this right trigger. You can turn this to toggle the pump on or off. There are a number of spray settings to where you can have this button do dynamic So like variable rate application, or it can just be a flat application. So you can kind of configure what this button's going to do using the GCS software. And then now if we're landing manually, we want to bring it below 50%, just a little bit until it touches down, and once it's on the ground, you hold it all the way down, and then the motors will turn off. Again, like I said before, I would recommend just press the land button. Over here. Press the land button. It's way easier. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just press it, and there you go. Drone will land better than you will. I can promise you that. Next one, so taking over during an auto mission. This is something that is going to, again, talk about these various strange flight mode interactions. Just important to practice this. So first thing, if you want to take over with this controller during an auto mission, if the RC is already turned on, then you just press the A button. You're going to take over. The controller, whenever you turn it on, it defaults into brake mode. And it defaults so that if you press loiter, it'll take over. Now, if the RC is turned off, you just turn it on and then put it into whatever flight mode you want. Now, just be aware the RC is going to take 15 to 20 seconds to boot up and connect, assuming it's in range. It probably would be if your computer's in range. So just be aware of that. You can't really have the RC turned off and rely on picking it up and using it at a moment's notice. If you want to have it at a moment's notice, you need to have it turned on already. So this kind of basically 3 through 5 talks about kind of the implications of this whole flight mode button behavior. Basically that whole switch, if you're going back and forth between autopilot with the computer and with that controller, you just need to know what position that flight mode switch is in. Because again, if you press the button for the same position, it won't do anything. Again, it's kind of confusing. We understand it's getting better all the time, but you just gotta learn how to use it and practice, and you should be fine. Now our last section here before we finish up this video is displaying the FPV on the controller. So first thing you want to do is power it on and hit this Q ground control app. These settings that we're talking about should already be selected, but you're going to hit this and hit video stream here, assuming it's not showing up. See this waiting for video? If you just click on that, it should pull up the video like this. And if you kind of double click in the center, it'll maximize the video. If you want, you can add a little SD card in the bottom next to the power thing, and you can hit this record stream button, and it'll record what's being streamed to the controller. It does not record locally on the drone, so if you lose connection, then your recording's gone too. All right, so this has been the controller and just kind of some spray drone basics. For the 15th time, recommend practicing with the controller. If you're going to be using it and you want to rely on it in an emergency situation, you need to be practicing beforehand to make sure that you are ready to go in those high-stress situations. All right, thank you for watching, and until the next video.